Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's session of the Pallas Athene Publishing House book launch series. My name is Yvette Bezi, and it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Campbell McPherson, who is an author, motivational keynote speaker, international business advisor, executive coach, workshop facilitator, non-executive director, and self-titled Change Catalyst. He's also an executive fellow of the world-renowned Henley Business School. He runs highly acclaimed Leading Change and Embracing Change workshops for organizations worldwide using key insights from his first book, The Change Catalyst, which was Business Book of the Year in 2018, and his latest book, The Power to Change, which now has been published in Hungarian with the title A Változás Bajnokai. Mr. McPherson has been enabling leaders to clarify their strategy and build culture that embrace change for more than 25 years at organizations large and small across the UK, Europe, Australia, United States, Asia, and the Middle East. What drives him is a burning desire to help organizations and people to change. He strongly believes that none of us is powerless in the face of change. Even when change is done to us, we always have a choice. At the very least, we can choose how we react to the change, and this can make all the difference. If all this was not convincing enough, I can tell you that Mr. McPherson has had 20 different employers and has moved house 18 times, moving from his native Australia to the United Kingdom and working as an expat in Abu Dhabi, so he's certainly not afraid of change. Today, Mr. McPherson will be talking about his new book, The Power to Change, with special focus on the acceptance of changes. I hope you will enjoy the presentation, and please feel free to ask questions on the subject after the talk. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Campbell McPherson.
Welcome, everybody. I'm afraid that's the only Hungarian and the poor Hungarian that I know. Welcome today. Today we are going to explore some very exciting topics, some crucial topics, some subjects that are critical for you in work and in life, whether you are a leader of change, and we are all leaders of change, no matter where we sit in an organization, or an influencer of change, because we are all influencers of change. In fact, leadership today is all about influence. It's not about hierarchy at all, but also about embracing change, because that's what we have to do in life and in work. But before I get stuck into that, I would just like to say it's an honor and a privilege to be here, and thank you so much to the bank, so much for Yvette for that kind introduction, and thank you so much to PA Books for publishing the Power to Change, or now the Champion of Change in Hungarian. It is quite a moment in my life, so let me just soak this up for a second before we get on with it. Thank you so much. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and then of course some Q&A at the end of it. Feel free to ask any questions. Tell me to be quiet if you've got a burning question, and jump in. Otherwise, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end of this. But the point of today is about change. It's leading change, it's influencing change, it's creating cultures that embrace change, and it's about embracing change ourselves. Because if we're not leading change, and we're all leaders of change, then we're not actually leading anything. We're simply just watching the status quo unravel. And if we've learned anything over the last few years, is the status quo doesn't last for very long. And culture is all about change as well, because if your people, as a leader of change, if your people aren't willing and able to embrace change, and if they're not skilled to embrace change, then nothing is going to happen. And of course, life is all about change, because the ability to accept change, to embrace change, and they're two slightly different things, are critical skills that we need to succeed at work and also to be content and fulfilled actually in life. So this is me. This is my website. Lots of videos, lots of things to download, and please troll around the website. What I do is I help organizations to build extraordinary leadership teams, and also to create leaders of change, starting with themselves. And so that's what I work with CEOs and leaders worldwide, as Yvette has said. And where my career started, no, it's not a career. I forget how many jobs, Yvette knows better than I do, employers, but I've also had many, many, many careers in my time. And I started out life accidentally joining the Royal Australian Air Force to become a pilot. And I did a physics degree in the Air Force, and then I still have the wonderful reputation of being the worst pilot ever to make it through to jets in the Royal Australian Air Force. In fact, one of the reasons why I was so bad is I had to memorize the eye chart to keep flying. Luckily, the Australian Air Force back in the 1980s didn't change the eye chart, so all I had to do was to know CLED, HB, TVO, and then I was fine. And right, you're fit to fly, Campbell. I wasn't. I was terrible. In fact, when I finally resigned after taking a jet up just before my 21st birthday, taking a jet up to 20,000 feet, doing barrel rolls and loop-the-loops, and it was madness. This was 2 years before Top Gun, so I didn't know how cool this was. And I put the pins in the ejection seat and took the helmet off and strode into my instructor's office. And I said, "Sir, I'd like to resign." And his response was, "Oh, thank God for that." I then started a long career that the only constant of it has been change. I first really worked out that change was a discipline when I joined Anderson Consulting about 25, 26 years ago. I thought change was just something that happened, that you had to put up with. Before I joined Anderson Consulting and learned it was actually a discipline that you could lead, that you could influence, that you could embrace. I also learned that Anderson Consulting did it really badly because they focused on the strategy, fine. They focused on the processes. They focused on the systems. You can tell I've been out of Australia 25 years and I just said processes. I haven't said that word for so long. Anyway, on the systems, what they didn't focus on was the people. And you can't have successful change if you don't engage every single person that is going to be involved in the change. Change is all about people. It's got nothing to do with systems or processes. And our entire world is changing. I gave a speech to a pipe manufacturer. It was a Finnish pipe manufacturer who manufactured pipes that for sewage pipes, for water pipes. And their one thing they wanted to talk about was the Internet of Things. And I said, "You're a pipe manufacturer. Why are you talking about the Internet of Things?" Because every single pipe has sensors in there that measure flow, measure viscosity, measure temperature, measure pressure. If pipe manufacturers are thinking about AI and the Internet of Things, every single one of us is going to experience change and disruption because of the internet, because of the fact we're all living longer, not all, but the majority of us living longer, because of inflation, of course, the cost of living. So our world is changing and we have no choice but to change with it. What I ask in my workshops, of the delegates in the workshops, is what have you learned about change these last few years? When I first asked this question in 2020, it was, what have you learned about change in the last few months? The change has been relentless over the last couple of years. What have we learned about change with everything that's been going on in the last few years? And I'd like you to think about that. What have you learned about your ability to lead change, your ability to influence change, and your ability to embrace change? And here's some of the responses that some of the delegates, firstly on Zoom in 2020. I got cross-eyed from Zoom workshops in 2020. But I love the first three on the list here. One person piped up on Zoom and said, "Do you know what I've learned, Campbell? I've learned that not all change is bad." And I went, "Okay, that's a good start." And someone else went, "That's weird. I've learned not all change is good." And I thought that was just the perfect juxtaposition of truths about change. And the key thing I'd like you to take from this slide is the third line. Even good change is net good. If you're leading a change initiative, if you're leading a strategy, if you're embracing a strategy or involved in a strategy, don't expect everything to be perfect. No change is perfect. And even good change is net good. It's 80% good, and that's more than good enough. And that's the key thing to take from that slide. But in the last 25 years, since I've learned that change was discipline, here are the 5 key things. I will distill 25 years into 5 bullet points that I've learned about change. And at first glimpse, they may seem fairly obvious, or as my wife would call BGOs, blinding glimpses of the obvious, but they're not. They're not. And let's go through them. Firstly, the first key truth about change is that change is inevitable. That sounds obvious, but it's not. But what it means is it's always with us. It's continuous. It's unrelenting. And so therefore, we have no choice but to embrace it. But if we accept that change is always with us, we can then actually start to do something about it. It doesn't have a start date and an end date. It's not a project. It's always with us. Change is simply a part of life that we have to roll with, that we can actually lead, we can influence, what we definitely have to embrace. The second key change is that all change is personal. Even the largest of organizational changes is actually a myriad of small, it's a culmination, of a myriad of small individual changes. All change is personal. It's not about systems, it's not about processes, it's about people. And we all erect our own personal barriers to change. So you have your own default barrier to change, and so do I, and we'll go through a few of those later in the presentation. So think through, what are your default barriers to change, and how can you help yourself to overcome them? Whoever you need to influence to change, what is their default barrier to change? Why are they resistant? Think it through and then help them overtly to overcome it. The fourth thing is that all change is emotional. In fact, emotions are 4 times more powerful than logic when it comes to change. 4 times. And that was a piece of work done by the Corporate Leadership Council back in 2004, a survey of 50,000 employees worldwide, and they found that logic was only 1/5 of the way to actually getting people engaged in a strategy or a change. Emotions are the other 4/5. So if you have a senior leader standing up on stage only thinking about the logic of why the business needs to change, of what needs to happen in the future, and this is the path we're going on, but doesn't engage with you emotionally, the entire audience is only 1/5 of the way to truly engaging in this change. Leadership is about helping people to want to change. And we can be our own leaders of change, because sometimes our leaders, the leaders that we see of the change, don't quite get that it's 80% emotions. So 88% of change initiatives do not succeed. 88% of business strategies do not succeed or do not deliver what they set out to achieve. 88% of mergers and acquisitions don't deliver what they set out to achieve. It's not a great track record when it comes to change. But what I want to do is to give you a few tips today that will help you to become the 1 in 8 of change leaders, of change influencers that actually succeeds. Because the big question we want to know is why? Why do 88% of change initiatives not succeed? And here's some of the reasons that the delegates have given me in my workshops. And there's all sorts of things, including a mad assumption that humans actually do as they're told. We're too busy doing the day job. How many of you have heard that one before? But everybody has heard that one before, and everyone has felt that one before. But probably the most important one is that people don't like change. And we have our inbuilt barriers to change that we will go through. Even Machiavelli said, leading change is the toughest job of them all. And he should know. He was an incredible manipulative leader of change. But I love that cartoon. Who wants to change? We all do. You know, who wants change? We all do. Who wants to change? Well, no one. Who wants to lead the change? There's no one there anymore. So what I want to talk about for the next couple of minutes is, let's get positive here. That's 88% of change initiatives fail. But let's go through the essential ingredients to successful change. And there's a hidden word there at the end, which is leadership. It's successful change leadership, because all of those reasons why change fails before actually comes down to leadership not doing the following. So let's get positive. Firstly, clarity of what we're trying to achieve and why. Clarity is critical. But it's not just the numbers. That's easy, particularly in our industry, in financial services. The numbers are easy. What's the narrative as well? So first we start with the what, the numbers and the narrative. What's the purpose of the change, of the new strategy? You know, why do we exist? What are we trying to achieve here? What is the magic that we don't want to let go of, that we have to retain in the new world? If you're running an organizational change project, what's the magic you don't want to throw out? You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What are some of the things no one questions, the sacred cows? And what are the questions no one dare answer? And they're the elephants in the room. We need to get all of those out on the table. But then we also need to ask why. Because everyone sitting in the audience, if this is a change kickoff meeting, is wanting to know the right reason for the change. This is why it will be good for the business. What I also want to know is the real reason for the change. What's in it for me? Why should I get emotionally engaged in this change? So as a leader of change, and you can be your own change leader, you need to address the what and then the why. But also understand that even good change is only net good. So there are downsides to absolutely everything. So we need to understand what are the implications of the change. So I was doing a piece of work with a large financial services platform, and the CEO stood up and gave his presentation for 30 minutes on what the new strategy was going to be. And then I stood up and said, okay, everyone, and it was the 100 of the most senior managers in the business. And I said, so what could possibly go wrong? And they all laughed a little bit. And I went, no, seriously. As the CEO was delivering his vision of the new world, all that was going through your head were all the reasons why it can't be done, or the obstacles we have to get over, or the fears, or the concerns. So let's get all of them out on the table. Let's get all of those out on the table. And so we did. We spent an hour doing that, and it was very cathartic for everybody. Then we spent another hour prioritizing them, and then we spent a whole half day on working out how are we going to mitigate and overcome these potential barriers to change. And it was one of the best days of consulting that I've ever been involved with, because at the end of it, 100 senior managers had not only agreed that we could deliver the strategy, because they'd come up with all their concerns and had started to work out how they themselves were going to own how to overcome them. So there are implications to every major change. One of the other essential ingredients is genuine communications and engagement. And by genuine, I mean two-way. Because while George Bernard Shaw said the single biggest problem in communication is the assumption it's actually taken place, Stephen Covey had an answer to this. It's about listening to understand. How many times have we been in a conversation or a workshop or even a presentation like this where you're thinking, rather than listening to understand what Campbell's saying, I'm desperate to jump in with my opinion. And particularly in conversations, that's what we do. We don't listen to understand. We don't test our understanding. And genuine communication is one of the key enablers of successful change, and that requires listening. Another key essential ingredient to successful change is that emotions trump logic every time. I've already said that emotions 4 times more powerful than logic, but there was a really interesting piece of research done by a Portuguese neuroscientist called Professor Dalmacio. And he did some research on people who had damaged a part of their brain that meant that they couldn't feel emotions. They were like Spock from Star Trek, that everything was logical. And one of the side effects of that is they couldn't make a decision. They couldn't make a decision on what to eat, on what to wear. I mean, when we decide what to eat, we don't say, I'll have 4 parts carbohydrate and 3 parts protein. It just doesn't work that way. So every single one of our decisions is actually strongly emotional. When I worked for the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority for 3 years, it was really interesting on how many decisions ended up being, but we have a strong conviction in the fund manager, or a strong belief that the US dollar is going to devalue over the next 6 months. In the end, it came down to gut feel. We had a lot of data. The logic was important, but the emotions, the emotional reaction, we are humans after all, was everything. Here's a little piece of a tool, really, that I put together with Henley Business School. And it's to describe how we react to change, because the most important part of all this is it's about people. So how we react to change. And it's a simple little 2x2 matrix. In fact, its beauty lies in its simplicity, and it's detailed in the book. In fact, actually, I did it for this book, and then we rolled it out for Henley. And on the y-axis, you've got the size of the change from small to big. That's fine. It's the x-axis that is actually where all the magic happens. And that's the degree of personal control that you have over the change. So we divided those into 4 quadrants, and I won't talk about the bottom 2. They're fairly self-explanatory. It's the top 2 that is where all the excitement happens. In the top left is the burning platform change, and I'm sure you've heard that word, that phrase many times about it. Do you have a burning platform for change? Which came from a change consultant 25 years ago, watching the news and seeing people leaping off a burning oil rig in the North Sea. And he thought, there's a burning platform for change, boom, boom. Now, I don't think we have to set the current state of the world or the business, set it ablaze in order to help people to change, but it's a great, great metaphor. And as we are in that quadrant where big change is forced upon me, we undergo a roller coaster of emotions that I will take you through. But we also do it when we choose big change. And this occurred to me as I was on the plane to Abu Dhabi and experienced it, as you will read in the book, is that even when we choose significant change, we also undergo a roller coaster of emotions. And let's have a look at those roller coasters. So, top left, the burning platform for change. This is the change curve that many of you will be familiar with. This is my slightly different take on it. And it's relevant for any big change that is forced upon anybody. It was first invented by a Swiss psychiatrist, Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, back in the 60s. And she called it, I think she called it her grief curve. She was helping people who were dying of terminal illnesses and also helping their relations cope with the enormous change that was going on in their lives. And she found that the emotions that both of those groups of people felt were not only uniform, they were predictable, but they were real, and they followed a certain pattern. We've adopted that for the world of business, and it works really, really well. When big change is done to us, the first emotion we experience is shock. That's it. It's like a rabbit caught in the headlights. Very quickly, we move into denial, which is this can't possibly be happening. When the leaders work out that this new organizational structure is mad, then they'll just change it. Yeah, and we'll all get back to how we were before. When the leaders don't change anything, we then get angry. That anger masks a whole host of fears. And then we can end up in the trough. I've called it the trough of depression, a little bit overkill here. It can be big D depression, but what I'm really talking about is that trough where you feel as though you are helpless. And we are not helpless in the face of change at all. We need to be very careful in that trough, as I'll talk to you in a second, because that's the place where victims dwell. And we do not want to be victims, and we cannot be victims in any of these situations. Eventually, once we get our own act together or some help from others, our head will start to understand, logic being 20% of the way there, then our heart, the emotions, will accept the change, we'll move up and down the right-hand side of this curve, and then we can finally move on. But we will never leave the change curve behind because change is continuous. Change is always with us. We need to be able to adapt and learn and enjoy the change curve because we are going to go through it several times in our life. Now, different people, I know some of you are thinking, well, I went through a big change and I didn't go through that. That change curve isn't real. Others will be going, oh my gosh, I wish I'd known that before. One of my workshops, there was a lady who was sitting at the back and was actually quite crying or sobbing as I went through this in great detail, which we do in the workshops. And she came up to me afterwards and I thought, what have I said? And she told me that her father had just died 3 weeks before, and that she went through every single one of these emotions, and she was now revisiting it. She said, but I wish I knew they were normal. I thought I was being weak. I thought I was being a loser. I thought, oh, what am I afraid of? And I didn't realize that this is a normal roller coaster of emotions where big change is done to you. So as leaders of change, this is what our people are going to go through. So therefore, we need to be aware. We need to help them to experience the change curve, not to race through it, and cut them some slack, give them a break. When they're angry, they're not angry at you. It's a normal emotion when we go through big change that is done to us. But be very, very careful of the trough. There's a wonderful, in 1968, Cartman did a piece of work called the drama triangle. And whenever we find people who are victims, and we've all donned the cold comfort cloak of victimhood in our past. When we do find that, when we find ourselves a victim, we'll also find two other players in this drama triangle, as Cartman called it. We'll find a persecutor, real or imagined, but we'll also find a rescuer. Someone who will race to our rescue, put their arms around us, give us a cup of tea and say, oh, you don't deserve this is terrible, this is great. And they're right, we don't deserve this. We didn't ask for this change. And we do feel like a victim. The problem is, if we believe the rescuer for too long, because the rescuer doesn't change, they get their kicks out of rescuing, so they don't actually want us to improve. What we need to do when we find a wonderful friend who's being a rescuer is to thank them and enjoy the comfort, and then get rid of them and get a coach or be our own coach. Because what we have to do is to say, yes, I didn't ask for this change. Yes, it's unfair. Yes, I don't deserve it. And then when we're ready to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what are you going to do to get over this? What are you going to do about it? Because it's up to us to move ourselves up the change curve. But even when we instigate big change, let's say we go for a promotion and then, oh my gosh, we got it. We will also go through a roller coaster of emotions, very similar in nature to the one before. Not quite as severe, but a similar change curve. And when we promote people, we should expect them to go through this change curve as well. It starts with excitement. I've got this new job, isn't it fantastic? And then it's apprehension. Oh my gosh, am I going to be able to be any good at this? I mean, I'm moving, I'm now more senior, so what relationships will I have before? There's apprehension. Then there's a fear. What if I'm rubbish at it? And then there's remorse. I had a really good life. Why did I go for this job? What am I doing? Finally, the head kicks in going, come on, Campbell, because this happened to me on the way to Abu Dhabi. You know they've hired you because you're good at this, you numpty. Will you stop worrying so much? And then the heart kicks in and going, actually, you are the right person for this job and you can do it. And then you can embrace the change. I went through this change curve on the way to Abu Dhabi, and I literally hopped off the plane into a new world thinking, I've been through a version of the change curve that no one tells you about. When I was running a workshop for one of the big insurance companies, the CEO stood up in front of her entire team and said, I'd just like you to know, I've been 9 months in, I'm now finally up to genuine belief. But it's taken me 9 months. And everyone went, really? And that was such a wonderful, open and honest approach for the CEO to take. It gave everyone else permission to be fallible, to be vulnerable, and to be themselves. It was a priceless moment. The other essential ingredient to sustainable change is set your people up to succeed and set ourselves up to succeed. So if you're a change leader, what do your people need to succeed? They need to be self-aware. They need self-belief. They need clarity of what we're trying to achieve and why. They need development. They need help to develop the skills, and they need support. They also need proper, clear governance, clear processes, but focus on the outcomes. But also, what do you need to succeed? And you need self-awareness, self-belief, clarity, development, and support. Find that for yourself as well. If your manager isn't providing it, if your leaders, find it for yourself. So what do you need to set yourself up to succeed? And that is what this book is all about. It's about setting yourself up to succeed and overcoming the barriers of change that lie within. And these are the little demons that we need to overcome. We need to admit denial when it's happening. Denial, there's something good about denial. If it's a really big, significant change that you're being subjected to in life or at work, a little bit of denial is a good thing. It just lets in as much as we can cope with. But very soon we need to admit that I'm in denial. I need to be getting on with this. We need to observe our emotions, but without judgment. So we need to observe our emotions. Go, I was really angry there. Isn't that interesting? Not, isn't that bad? What a loser. Just, isn't that interesting? I was angry there. We need to detach ourselves from our negative thoughts. We need to confront our fears. We need to have a look at our identity, because that's actually one of the biggest barriers to change. By all means, we need to voice our doubts and concerns. And then importantly, we need to accept reality. And let's have a little look at each one of those very quickly. Do you know what? We're not our emotions. My wife is a brilliant yoga teacher. She used to be the head of brand strategy for Barclays, and then 18 years ago decided that she'd rather be a yoga teacher. And she's a brilliant yoga teacher and yoga therapist and runs retreats around the world. And what she does is help her clients and her fellow yogis to just observe, to stand back, stay a little bit detached and observe the emotions. And once you just start to observe the emotions, oh, I was nervous there. Oh, I was angry. I'm obviously afraid of something, but without judgment, then suddenly you've taken a step back and you're a step closer to actually being able to, A, accept that we are emotional beings, that emotions are normal, and then B, to help ourselves on the route to overcoming them. As the Dalai Lama says, stop, take a breath, observe, and then proceed. Makes a huge difference. We also need to detach ourselves from our negative thoughts. Do you know that we have about 80,000 thoughts a day and 80% of those are negative? And that comes from an evolutionary background when we were being chased by saber-toothed tigers and expecting danger around every rock. And we were living to about 22. Now we're living to about 92. If we're in wealthier parts of the world, we still have this age-old prehistoric brain that is full of negative thoughts. Mind you, as I got out of the plane yesterday and was met by Sousa, I then fell up the stairs into the VIP bus. So maybe some negative thoughts are good. Remember to lift your feet so you don't skin your knees. But anyway, our negative thoughts are so powerful that they can actually make us ill. In the book, I go through a couple of really interesting, hilarious stories. One is about a placebo. We all know what placebos are. They're pills with sugar or nothing in them. I talk about a lady who had irritable bowel syndrome for 18 years and suffered through so much pain and that it was unbearable. And she was put on a trial program where she knew she was either going to get no pill once a day or a pill filled with sugar once a day. And she ended up on the pill filled with sugar once a day part of the trial. After 6 weeks of the program, her pain was reduced so much, her standard of living was increased threefold, that she begged to stay on the trial, even though she knew there was absolutely nothing in the pills, that the power of the mind is incredible. And there's another story in the book about placebo surgery, about 180 people who received knee surgery. And they were split into 3 groups. The first 2 groups actually received different surgical techniques on their knees. The third group, where the screen was put up, they were given their painkiller injections, and they cut, their knees were cut, and then the doctors pretended to do things. They just moved a spoon and fork or something around, inside the knee, then sewed them back up. There was absolutely no statistical significant difference between any of the 3 groups in terms of pain and in terms of recovery time or how good the knee was at the end of it. I mean, that's absolutely bonkers. The power of the mind is incredible. So we need to tell ourselves good stories about ourselves. Don't tell negative stories about ourselves. If we want to accept and embrace the change, we need positive stories about ourselves. We need to detach from our negative thoughts and tell ourselves, as Derren Brown says, we are the product of the stories we tell ourselves. So let's start telling ourselves some positive stories based on an understanding of the strengths and the value that we actually add. We need to confront our fears, and that's easier said than done, but frankly, fear is just false evidence appearing real. What are we afraid of? We're afraid of failure, big time. We're afraid of rejection or humiliation. We're afraid of the unknown. And sometimes we're afraid of being blamed for not changing earlier. You will see that in business a lot. When you come up with a new idea, whoever has been, for example, a recruitment process in Abu Dhabi. When I went in there, I went, it should not take you 18 months to recruit people. We should be able to do this in 3 to 6. And the Emirati in charge of the organization, I was a part of the organization I was working with, said, yes, oh, could you help us to do that? So I simply, logic, not understanding that not even thinking about other people. I walked in there, I went, right, well, here's the new process, and I shared it with a few people, and I changed it. I said, why don't we do this? The person that was responsible for recruitment and had been for the last 25 years, weirdly was a little put out because he was fear of being blamed for not changing earlier. And what I didn't realize, because I wasn't being emotionally aware or emotionally intelligent, to be honest, is that he could have lost his job because suddenly he would have lost face. And if you lose face in that part of the world, you pretty quickly lose your job. So I had to do it a totally different way and repair a lot of bridges. So fear of being blamed. So what are you afraid of? What are the people who you are trying to convince and influence about change? What do you think they're afraid of? What is holding them back? Is it fear of failure? Is it fear of rejection? And let's help them. If it is fear of failure, then let's work out what to do in small steps. So you can fear of failure. There we go. Ritz-Carlton. They've removed the word failure from their lexicon. You can only use the word glitch because glitches you can recover from and move on. Failure is terminal. And what they really mean is that's a small step. Oh, we've learned something. That didn't quite work. We'll change something and then we'll move on. What are you afraid of? We need to confront them. And if you don't like something, either accept it or change your attitude. And I think that is fabulous. I won't talk about that one. We need to voice our doubts and concerns as leaders of change and as people who influence change, and all of us are both of those things, and we're also people who need to embrace change. We need to voice our doubts and concerns. We need to do it in a sensible way, but we need to get our doubts and concerns on the table, and if you're leading change, you need to get the others' doubts and concerns on the table as well. But most importantly, we need to accept reality. I mentioned here the Serenity Prayer. There's a couple of other models, 2 models that I think would be really useful here. One is, in the center of this target is the things we can actually control. The outer ring is the things we can influence, and then the furthermost yellow outer ring are the things we can only observe. Another way to think of this is write 3 lists of all of the concerns that are going on in your head, or the things, the changes that you can see need to be made. Here at the bank, there are changes that you think should be made and you need to be making. There are certain things about how the bank works, how the world works, that is really annoying you and you don't understand why that hasn't changed. Make 3 lists. The first list is things you can't change. And look at it and read it and memorize it and accept it, and then screw it up into a ball and throw it away. Because the other 2 lists you can do something with. One is, what can I change on my own? And the third one is, what can we change together? Then you've got 2 to-do lists. Most of the time we spend so much time focusing on the things we simply can't change, and it's a lot of energy, and it's not accepting reality. Now, it's tough to know the difference between the 3, but hey, make your 3 lists. And then throw the first one away. Because the only certainty is actually uncertainty, and that's thousands of years old of wisdom that I'm quoting there. What we have to do is to build our resilience, because that is all about accepting reality. And probably the most important part of the chapter on resilience that you'll all enjoy reading is accept that change is a part of life, keep things in perspective, like and take care of yourself, but it's this one. It's accept that change is a part of life, and building resilience to be able to strong roots and to bend with the winds of change is absolutely critical to be a successful leader, to be a successful influencer, and to be success or content at any single thing we do at work and in life. Because it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent. but the one most responsive to change. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that you may have about organizational change, about personal change, about change curves, or about what it will be like for me to swim in the warm Pacific Ocean next week when I'm in Australia. Any questions? We have a roving microphone.
Thank you very much. Right at the beginning of your speech, we've heard that change is not something that just happens to us. Are there any good strategies to be prepared for the changes to come? I mean, does it take a kind of insight or foresight?
That is a really good question. That's a very insightful question, to be honest. The forearmed is forewarned. So what I do say in the book is, for example, for people who are made redundant and then think, I want to start my own business. Well, oh my gosh, how do I start my own business? Learn how to start your own business. So it's much better to do as much research as possible over what could change in the future and what could affect you in the future. So that's one thing, to be prepared for change, on research on what could be possibly changing. The other is to start to build that resilience, and that's the chapters. There's a whole chapter on resilience in the book, which is all about these different things and building your resilience to change, making every day meaningful, but knowing that you can bend with the winds of change is critical. So do your research, believe in yourself, and read the chapter on resilience and build that up. But it's about making the change, making the unknown known. I think what we fear is the unknown. So if we research about what could possibly change, knowing that change is going to come, that is instantly helping us to become better at accepting whatever change does happen down the track. Did the change curve resonate with people? Were sitting there going, "No, I don't." Who was sitting there saying, "Well, I haven't gone through that change curve"? Because there was one lady who actually stood up and said, "That's rubbish, Campbell." I went, "Oh, that's a lovely start." So that's rubbish, because I tell you what happened. I went to work. I got a phone call from my next door neighbor who said that my husband, my 40-year-old husband, had a stroke and had collapsed. And so I had to, and in fact, no, it was from my mother, because they were staying with us, the stroke and collapse. So I didn't go through any of that curve. I went home, I took him to the hospital, I got rid of my family, and we just carried on. And I said, "Oh, how long ago was that?" 3 months. And I said, "Okay, well, give us a call in a month and see how you're going." She said, "I didn't experience that at all." She's going to experience, when she finally stops, the adrenaline stops, she's going to go through that change curve. Anyway, I should have kept in touch with her.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is that when you say that leadership is about helping people to want to change, and what do you think the first step is, what to do this?
No, thank you. I don't think it's the first step, but yes. To me, the definition of leadership is to help people to want to change. Because if people don't want to change, then they won't be giving their all. So there's certain stages on this. Helping people to change is one thing, and you can go 20% of the way there. They're 20% with you if they're changing. But if they want to change, then they can be 100% engaged with you. But in order to help them to want to change, we then need to do all of the things that we talked about, which is we need to give them clarity of what the future looks like and why we need to change. We need to engage them in understanding what the implications are of the change. We need to understand that we need to find their emotional triggers to get them engaged in the change. So it's more of the headline that then everything else. Are we helping? It's like a North Star. It's a check. Let's go with North Star. Are we helping people to want to change? So if we work with them to understand the implications, that's helping them to want to change. Great. If we trigger with their emotions, that's helping them to want to change. If it's what processes or structures do they need, that's helping them to want to change. It's taking away their fear of change. Because if you don't give them process or structure, then they're going to be fearful that they won't be able to change. One of my clients at the moment is a subsidiary of a very large US bank, and the COO who I'm working for, their people are really reluctant to change because they don't have the clarity of strategy that they want. The COO thinks that he's delivered a clear strategy, but none of his people think that the strategy is clear. So that's a part of, they need to be helped to want to change. And the key thing that we're helping them do is to give a very, very clear strategy and why we need to change and what it means for them. And then suddenly they relax and go, okay, that's going to be tough, but at least I know where I'm headed. So that line is more of a check slogan, something to think through. Am I helping people to want to change? No. Or what can I be doing? How can I understand what their barriers to change are? How can I understand their fears? Am I giving them the clarity? Am I giving them the process? Am I helping them to make it easier to change? Sir.
Thank you very much. I have a question. We are facing a change, which is the climate change.
Yep.
What should be done to make decision makers change? I have one target. It's CO2 emissions.
Yeah. There's the well. What is, goodness me? This is a, what if I had the magic bullet for this one? There's there's a thing on climate change, a chapter on climate change in the book that I wrote to try and convince my father that climate change was real and we need to be doing something about it. What leaders need to do is to go back to helping people to want to change. They need to want to change. One of the issues is that politicians around the world, no matter what system that they happen to be in, are not as convinced as they should be that the urgency is there, which is madness. So they need to help themselves to want to change, and they need to somehow convince others that the pain, or to lessen the pain of the change, is going to happen. At the moment, the logic is irrefutable of climate change, and I go through that in the book. Very simply, the logic is irrefutable, but somehow the emotions are kicking in. Politicians around the world have found that they've got swathes of the electorate who simply don't believe or don't want to believe that climate change is real. Now, my father would be one of those to go, we've had cyclones in Queensland ever since I was, 7. We've had bushfires in Australia ever since Mount Vesuvius erupted, and he will be going through, rather than actually wanting to understand the science and understanding that the frequency of the bad weather, and they're confusing climate and weather, the frequency and the severity of the weather events are increasing all the time. He turns around to me and said, so why aren't the Maldives underwater? I've been hearing for 50 years that the ocean levels are rising. And as I explained in the book, it's because it's exponential. It's because, in the last 100 years, the first 25 years, we had a 5 millimeter average sea rise. Then we had a 25 millimeter the next 75 to 50 years. Then it's 50 millimeters. By the time we get to 2070, it's going to be about a meter difference, and it's because it's exponential rise. But people can't seem to understand that. I'm warbling, because if I had the answer to that, that would be fabulous. But there's so many issues. I do fear, when it comes to climate change, things have to get much, much, much worse before politicians around the world will be able to make a real major difference and change the way that we are actually running and ruining this planet. So that's not the positive end I wanted to. But they're going to have to want to change. How do we help them to want to change? There we go. How do we influence our politicians to want to change? And it's not by blocking the M25 and gluing ourselves to bollards, but how do we make it the best decision for them that they will stay in power if they embrace climate change. Australia recently made a change in its government, and the big reason, two big reasons. One was they wanted a government that was powered by integrity. So there's an anti-corruption commission that has started, and the other second reason was the previous government, who was big on coal and very little on wind and solar and tidal. And considering Australia has ridiculously enormous landmass, ridiculously enormous amount of sun, probably more coast than you could possibly poke a stick at, it should be a leader, and brilliant universities, it should be a leader in non-fossil fuel energy, and yet it hasn't in the past because its governments and its media has kept it in the green is woke, green is pathetic, and coal and oil is good. They've had a change of government because it's been a groundswell upwards of saying no, we need to tackle climate change and we need to start now, and we could be a leader in this technology if we get going.